Hey, how are you guys? My name is Shay Stanford, and I'm really excited to bring you this episode of Seay Shares because it is, man, type 2 diabetes is such a big, ugly disease, expensive, heartbreaking disease. So I spent 6 years as a pharmaceutical rep, and I called on endocrinologists, and diabetes by far is, type 2 diabetes is by far the biggest driver for me to do what I do now, because I sat in so many endocrinology offices with my bag of pills looking at diabetic patients sitting in the waiting room with their legs have been amputated, they are on dialysis, they had retinopathy, and I would look in my bag and I'm like, there's nothing in this bag that is going to truly help and reverse this disease for so many of these patients. And so often I remember thinking, if I could just have gotten to that person 10 to 20 years ago, I could have made a difference, and they would not have their legs amputated, and they'd be able to see, and they'd be running around with their kids and their grandkids and playing tennis in their retirement and doing so many things, not sitting here in a doctor's office with a bag of 10 to 12 medications, having their blood checked every 3 months. So hands down, type 2 diabetes and what it does for the people that have it has been the number one driver for me to do what I do now as a health advocate, because truly there's so many things that we can do to help people who A, already have this disease, B, people who may have just recently been diagnosed, or C, people tend to have hyperinsulinemia and high sugar levels 10 to 12 years before they're actually diagnosed. So I am living my purpose and trying to get people to understand and share how this disease works and what it does, and how hopefully we can prevent the deterioration of what this disease does for so many people. Okay, so first of all, what is type 2 diabetes? The number one thing when I ask somebody who's diabetic, do you know what type 2 diabetes is? And they say it's a sugar disease. It's a disease of having too many sugars. And, I think, so I'm going to explain to you how sugars is a byproduct of the actual disease. And the actual disease with diabetes is insulin resistance. What the hell does that mean, right? I'm going to explain to you what insulin resistance is, and then you will see how high sugar levels is a byproduct or a consequence of insulin resistance. So I'm going to give this example to you guys. Okay, what normally happens when you're healthy and you don't have type 2 diabetes is you eat food, your cells need nourishment. So your food's broken down and then it's sent out to your cells. Well, the nourishment just can't get, let's say this is a cell. The nourishment just can't get into the cell. It needs like a key to open up the cell so that the food can get in and those cells can be nourished. So I've got my little necklace here. It just happened to have a key on it. So imagine that this key is insulin. This is insulin in your body. This is your cell. So when you eat, insulin takes the nourishments, opens up the cell, it opens, and then your cell can get nourished and fed and all the nutrients that it needs. What happens in type 2 diabetes? It's a disease of insulin resistance, which means the cell no longer recognizes the insulin. This key no longer unlocks the cell. So your cells they start to starve. They start to get malnourished. And so what does your body do? Your body always wants to create homeostasis. So it sends more insulin. Send more insulin because what we have is not working. So your pancreas is what releases insulin. So now your pancreas is working to try and just imagine if you were, teaching your son to play football and you're just throwing the balls at him because eventually he's going to catch one, right? So that's kind of the concept that your body does with insulin. It starts releasing a ton of insulin to open up these darn cells that are resistant. So what happens over the years is your body slowly starts to release and you have high insulin levels. And that also in turn means you've got all these higher sugar levels. So, but the problem with the disease, the actual core of the disease, are these cells have turned off their sensitivity to the insulin. So how do we reverse insulin resistance? And this is really ironic because the American Diabetes Association, the #1 first line treatment across the board, the very first thing you do when somebody has insulin resistance, what do you think the very first thing that the American Diabetes says to prescribe? Diet and exercise. First line treatment for insulin resistance is getting up off your butt and moving and changing your diet. Because a lot of what turns these cells off are processed foods, fatty foods, poor diet, poor lifestyle. Most of the time, it is a lifestyle disease that occurs that can be reversed through lifestyle and better food choices. So, ironically, the first line of treatment that the American Diabetes Association suggests, nobody wants to do because that's hard work. Can't you just give me a pill? I can take a pill and I don't have to worry about it, and it'll reduce my insulin levels and reduce my sugar levels, right? As long as my numbers, match where they're supposed to be, I'll be fine. But that's the problem, is pills can artificially manipulate the numbers for a short period of time, but it's not changing the fact that you still have insulin resistance, that the cells are not recognizing the insulin. So oftentimes, because diabetes is an expensive disease, people will say, well, give me the most, the cheapest thing that will get my numbers down, right? It's all about the numbers, all about my sugar levels, nothing about the insulin resistance. I don't want to exercise. I don't have time for that. Eating healthy is crappy. I don't want to bother with that. That's too much work. I love my food, right? I'm entitled to my food. So we skip right over the actual first line of treatment suggested by the American Diabetes Association. So the second thing, most often, is this is the cheapest product on the market for treating diabetes. And it is a very long word. You don't even have to know it. It's called a sulfonylurea. That's the class. They're drugs, some of the common names you may know it by is glyburide if you're on some of these medications. What this particular diabetes drug does is, remember we were throwing the football, right, for your kids? It goes to your pancreas and it tells your pancreas, start pumping out more insulin because we're just going to freaking saturate these cells with insulin so that eventually they'll get some. And so your pancreas is like, okay, all right. So your pancreas is, well, what happens when you're throwing a ball for an hour or two? What happens to your arm? It gets tired. And so long-term use of these sulfonylureas that are like $10, they're super cheap, people's pancreases wear out. And now they have to take insulin because now their pancreas isn't able to produce insulin because it's worn out. Another class of drugs is called metformin. Metformin is actually a really good drug. Problem is it only treats insulin resistance at a very, very, very minute level. This drug works in the liver. You've got to take it twice a day. And basically what it does is it stops the liver from converting things to sugar. So you have less sugar in your body. But again, very little impact. A little bit, but very little impact on insulin resistance. So is that really treating the core of the disease? No. And so if people aren't changing their diet and they're not getting out and exercising, this is still getting worse. This is becoming more and more resistant because all these drugs we're throwing at it aren't changing this. It's just changing the ecosystem around it, which is us getting sicker and sicker and sicker. There are other drugs out there, another really big word called thiazolidinediones. Don't have to know that word, but that was a drug that was specifically designed to treat insulin resistance and help the cells unlock. They did have a lot of cardiovascular issues with those particular types of drugs. And then, of course, there's insulin. So that's typically kind of the end stage. But this is what's mind-blowing. The American Diabetes Association and the Journal of American Medicine both say people do not die of high sugar levels with diabetes. 90% of people die of cardiovascular disease. They die of They have high cholesterol, they have high blood pressure. The average diabetic is on 10 to 12 medications because of all the comorbid stuff that begins to happen with diabetes. All those reasons that we're not actually treating the insulin resistance, everything else starts to deteriorate around. So diabetics are typically on an ACE inhibitor. They're typically on some type of statin, a cholesterol medication. They're typically have erectile dysfunction if it's a male because the blood flow is not working properly through the body. They typically sometimes are on an antidepressant or anxiety. They're on so many different medications. It's a truly expensive disease. And a lot of these medications, don't necessarily play nice together once they're in your body. So typically diabetics are tired and they don't feel well and they feel sluggish. They don't have the energy. They have increased cravings because their body is lacking nourishment because it's not getting the nourishment it needs. So I know this can be like really, really overwhelming if somebody is diabetic, but truly the disease can be prevented by exercising because exercise is the one thing we know that can reverse insulin resistance. And then the food we put in our body. That is why it's the first line of therapy for the American Diabetes Association. But unfortunately, sadly, people don't want to do that. But if I can paint the picture to you that if you are anywhere near, like possibly being diagnosed, you're newly diagnosed, already have been diagnosed, it's never too late that you can start reversing what has happened in your body and improving those cells so that they are able to receive. One of the things that I think is really unfortunate is typically the end stage. So when you have high insulin levels in your body, and this is a lot what I was mentioning on the beginning of this webinar, is that those high insulin levels eventually poison the nervous system. So people have retinopathy, which is where they start getting the glaucoma and start going blind. Their eyesight starts to get foggy. They have neuropathy, which is the nerve endings, typically in the feet because it's the farthest from the heart. So they start getting sores on their legs and their feet and oftentimes having to get amputations. They often can be on dialysis because their kidneys start to shut down, all because of the high insulin levels in the body. So getting these insulin levels down, and you can see how some of these drugs, when you go in and you demand the cheapest drug possible, are making the disease worse because they're increasing these insulin levels in your body, not fixing the problem. Here's something else that's interesting. Most of the time you'll go to doctors and they will say, okay, you need to be, my dog is going crazy downstairs. Most of the time you will go to these doctors and they'll say, okay, just eat low calorie, eat low sugar, stuff like that. So what do most diabetics do? They reach for artificial sweeteners. I'm going to shut my sliding glass doors. I will be right back. Okay, made a little bit of a difference. Okay, they reach for artificial sweeteners. Here's the thing with artificial sweeteners, things like Splenda, Sweet and Low, all these other things. It is known that what they do, so this is what happened. You take in, sorry, I got a phone call. You take in an artificial sweetener, and this is whether you have diabetes or not. This is how artificial sweeteners work. Our body knows what it's supposed to do. So our body thinks it's getting, sometimes Splenda's how many times sweeter than sugar? It's a ridiculous amount. Our body thinks, I'm getting a ton of sugar, something really, really sweet. Well, what do? What does your body know to do when it gets something really sweet? Releases insulin. And it releases a lot because this artificial sweetener is really sweet. But what happens, there's no calories to go with that artificial sweetener. So your body is confused. It's like, okay, we just sent out all this insulin and there's nothing for it to do, right? This is the second thing that artificial sweeteners do. They increase your carbohydrate cravings. You're not supposed to be eating because carbs turn to sugar. Right? Refined carbs turn to sugar. So now artificial sweeteners, you're thinking, doctor, I'm doing great. I'm eating artificial sweeteners. I'm keeping my calories right here. It's not a real sugar, blah, blah, blah. But your body is smart. Your body's designed to work a certain way. We're dumping these frankenfoods into it that's totally jamming up the way our body's designed to work. So now we have increased carbohydrate cravings and increased insulin. And the third thing is it tricks your body into holding on to fat. Well, what do most diabetics have a problem with? Losing weight because of high insulin levels. So can you see this vicious cycle? And some of it has to do with just lack of education on what the disease is, because most diabetics will say it's a disease of the sugars. They don't know what to eat. They're just solely focused on the sugars. They're putting artificial sweeteners in their body, which is making it worse, among all these other fake frankenfoods that don't nourish the body and reverse insulin resistance. And then they end up on more and more and more pills that gets ridiculously expensive, and they've not done hardly anything to reduce or reverse the disease. They continue to decline and get worse and worse and worse. And I've seen it for years, and it's freaking heartbreaking. And if you know of anybody that has diabetes, especially end stage, it's awful. And truly, sorry, I keep getting notifications. Diet and exercise is the first line of treatment. And if you say, I don't really like exercise and I don't like eating healthy, I'm going to tell you right now with big truth bomb, you're sure as hell not going to like being on insulin and having your feet amputated and going blind. That's way worse. So choose what you don't like, because this disease is mean, angry, and a lot of the things that how we treat it is counterintuitive to what it really needs. So I hope that was helpful for you guys in understanding what insulin resistance is, what diabetes is. Sugars is a byproduct, is a consequence of the insulin resistance, how to reverse it, and how a lot of these medications and what we actually die of. They actually die of cardiovascular disease. Again, we know that exercise and diet will help you lose weight and help your cardiovascular system. All right, guys, this is my second episode of Seay Shares, here to help you refine your life. Feel free to share this video with anybody you know and love that type 2 diabetes is a part of their life. Take care.